I spent last Christmas at my parents' house. They live in Flowery Branch, Georgia, about 45 minutes northeast of Atlanta, in a house that they built in 2019. In 2021, my grandmother moved in. It was last December that I sat with her on the downstairs porch, maybe over a cocktail or two, and we just started talking. And the conversation went something kind of like this: Grandma, I'm so glad that you live with my parents now and that we get to see you every time we come back for holidays. Well, Austin, I'm really happy that they thought about me when designing their home. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. The boys they love it here. So, well, Austin, what do they love about it? So, well, it's just so different from where we live. Like, this is a nice big new construction home. They've got some space to run around. It can be freezing cold outside, and we still have enough nooks and crannies throughout the house to not feel like we're breathing on top of each other. And it's just different. She said, "Oh, well, have you ever thought of building your own house?" And I kind of laughed. And I realized she's lived in Georgia the past 40 years and probably doesn't really understand what things are like out west. So I tried to explain. I said, "Grandma," and pointed out into these woods. So you see how much woods are out there? She said, "Yeah." I said, "So if somebody wanted to buy an acre, whoever owns all that land, they might, for the right price, sell them an acre. And maybe if it's more like 100 acres for the right price, somebody might come in and build a subdivision. But they can only do that because there's a big, massive amount of land that somebody owns. That's not what it's like where we live. Where we live, all the land and nature, that's protected. There's not like a spot that hasn't been built unless it's on an incredible slope. And that's going to cost way too much money. So one of the things people do who do build quote unquote new construction homes where we live, Grandma, is they will buy an older home, they will tear it down to two walls, and they will try and build a new home on top of it. But that's not something us middle class folks can afford. And so she just kind of sipped her cocktail and smiled. Now, I wasn't sure if she thought that I was like deflating her idea or if she just was like, "Oh, okay, I don't know. I don't get it. Where I live, we just build houses." And I tell this story because none of our neighborhood was ever thinking about rebuilding. Our houses were built in the 1920s. There's, 30s, and whatnot. If you wanted to build a home, maybe you'd be able to add an addition or really try and get creative with an ADU. But building a home from scratch, that just wasn't in the cards for any of us. So what happens when you're not necessarily when something like that isn't attainable, it typically just isn't a hobby, right? Maybe if you live in Texas, a state that has a lot of residential building, you might be a little bit more into construction. You might think about what new homes look like. You might go in a lot of open houses for new construction homes. Not here. So when the fire hit, I can't think of a community that was less prepared to rebuild new construction homes than our very own, only because it just never seemed like it was in our path. And so I wanted to explore the idea of rebuilding because it's different than building, right? It's different to have this desire, this hobby or passion or this goal that you have in life to build a house versus having everything taken away and having to rebuild. And that's why I have Abbie Liel on today. Abbie's a professor at the University of Colorado. And I came across Abbie's work in actually one of our neighborhood Facebook groups. People were sharing different resources, and one of them was from a group of professors in the construction space in Boulder, Colorado, that learned a lot of lessons from the Marshall Fire that happened there locally in 2021 and went on to go and explore the fires in Maui as well. And so I wanted to talk to Abbie about this concept of rebuilding. And one of the things she brought up that I found was really interesting was, there's so many different aspects of rebuilding. There's an actual home, then there's the actual community. And I got to be honest, I thought we were going to get really tactical, almost to the point where, if you weren't building a home, this wouldn't be as relatable. And it really wasn't like that at all. It was actually, there was a lot of conversation around synergy with builders and understanding who you are, your values, your priority. And I don't know, I just found the whole thing really fascinating because when you talk to somebody who's an expert in their field, the way that Abbie is, she's looked at more data about rebuilding than any of us. And, now that we're all in this situation we never thought we were going to be in, we never asked for, but guess what? We're here. We need people like Abbie to lend her expertise. So we're a little on the nose this time. And let's dive in. I'm Austin LaRoche, and this is the Altadena Rebuild, Episode 3, Rebuilding 101. Abbie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
All right, I want to start with you. So I know you're a structural engineer by trade with a knack for disaster resilient design. You're also a leading researcher in communities rebuilding after wildfires. So tell me how you got here and the research you and your team are currently working on.
Yeah, so I've always been really passionate about what engineering and the built environment can do to make our lives better and our communities better and safer. And so disaster resilient design is really kind of my professional passion that aligns with that interest. So I've studied things like how can we improve seismic design of buildings to ensure that they remain functional after earthquakes. I've worked on problems about like how can we build safer houses in the hurricane context, and now I'm working on these questions about wildfires, and really looking at in the wildfire context, we're really looking at what can we do, what are we doing as far as rebuilding, and are we realizing goals in terms of building back better, and what does that look like, and how does that help us as individuals, as communities, reach some of our broader goals. And I got into the wildfire context specifically because we had a very devastating fire in Colorado in Boulder County that destroyed about 1,000 homes about 3 years ago. And so I was really seeing an opportunity to use my research and professional interests to both contribute to and understand what my own community was going through in that rebuilding process.
Okay, I want to touch on a phrase that you said, which was build back better, because here in Altadena, we have a lot of historic homes. And so the idea of like building back better is exciting to a lot of the population, including myself, right? And utilizing some of the newer, more resilient type of design. I know that others have had a little bit of a hard time recognizing that these vintage homes from the 1920s are no longer. So when you say build back better, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think build back better means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For me, it really means, realizing our goals as individuals or as communities in what we're building. For those, like Austin who lost your home, like you don't have the option of having what you had before, unfortunately, right?
Yeah,
whether
absolutely.
you'd like that or not. And so then, in terms of rebuilding, for me, it's really about thinking critically about what do you want? What resources do you have to make that possible? And how can you think really strategically about getting what you want? And so for me, that's really what building back better means is, are you interested in a more fire resilient home? Well, what could that look like for you? Are you interested in a more energy efficient home? What could that look like for you? Are you interested in a bigger home? What could that like? All of those things could be building back better. And the rebuilding context forces you to take kind of a clean slate approach and really think about what that could look like.
Yeah, absolutely. And my answer to what you were saying was D, all of the above. All of that sounds like building back better. We are forced to do some things. I know for fire resilience, everyone's going to have sprinklers, and we're also going to rely more on solar. But just as a community, and I talked about this at the top, like we were never expecting to rebuild, right? We didn't. We It was an older neighborhood, older homes. So what does even a fire resilient home look like? Like, what does, if that is our priority, what would that look like beyond solar panels and some sprinklers inside?
Yeah. So, as far as fire resilience, there's things that you can do to your home. There's things that you can do to your land around your home, and there's also things that you can do as a community to improve your community's fire resilience. So from the home perspective, right, thinking critically about roofing and wall materials, windows. So some fires in California, for example, have shown better outcomes depending on the type, if the more fire resistant window is used. Eaves and how eaves are designed are critical, which is something I don't know about you, Austin, but I never think about the eaves on my house. I probably couldn't even sketch an image of it if you asked me to, but it turns out that some designs allow those embers to get under there and start,
Hmm.
find a little home, and some Eve designs do not. And so that's an example for me of a case where, like, I, if I were in your shoes, I would really want to make sure that was taken care of because it's easy. I don't care about what my eaves look like particularly. And like, that's just like an easy win. Or vents being covered. So having your vents covered, vents provide another mode of entry for embers. And so you making sure you have a proper vent design. So that's a kind of the house level, right? Then you
Hmm.
have your land, and I think probably a lot of people know about defensible space, but that's harder in some communities than others. So in some of the communities here, houses are relatively close together, and so you actually can't provide the
Hmm.
defensible space of some of those recommendations. Um, but as you think, farther down the process, as you start to think about vegetation, some vegetation is more fire resistant than others. Fencing and decks are pretty critical. So can you live with a non-wooden fence? Because we know fences are a form of fire spread. Can you have a deck that doesn't allow embers to get underneath? So it's designed in such a way that it's
Hmm.
enclosed. So it's not allowing so things like that. And they're all little tweaks. Like none of them alone is like, oh my gosh, your house would never burn down. But all these little things can help your house and also help your neighbor's house. Because when your house burns, that's like the fuel that starts the fire in the neighbor house. So it's really kind of a community thing as well as an individual thing around the fire resilience questions.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting on the fire resilience side because I think we obviously want to have as much fire resilient homes as possible. But sometimes, like when I talk to my architect, she's like, "Your PTSD is driving a lot of this. Like you're allowed to use some wood, Austin. Like people still build homes with wood, and I think that's just something we're all trying to figure out, right? Because we're going to have to balance costs, our own personal experience. Obviously nobody wants to see the neighborhood go up in flames ever again, and so we're trying to just learn so much about like what that looks like. And so one of the things that I'm interested in is some of the things that you've learned in looking at the rebuilds in Boulder as well as Maui. So what are some of the key lessons that kind of emerged in those rebuilds, and how might those be applicable to us?
Yeah, so one lesson I would share is that the builder that you choose matters a lot because most of us we're not builders. We didn't intend to build our own home, especially in the rebuilding context. And so we're really working with professionals who you've hired or are planning to hire
Hmm.
to do that. And what we've seen in our context is that builders really helped people reach those goals about whatever your goals are, or kind of, or didn't, I guess is the other way of putting it. So, for example, if you are really interested in energy efficiency as something you'd like to see in your home, making sure that you ask potential builders about, or architects, or whoever your building team is, about that, and making sure that that's a conversation they want to engage in. That means that they're going to help you realize that goal. And we're not all experts in what type of heating and cooling system is the best. And so you really need a team. And so one thing that I think is really important from what we've seen here is if you have something that's important to you, making sure that you are asking questions about those things, or if you have values that you want to see represented in your rebuilt home, making sure that you are asking your builder about those things, because some builders have more or less willingness to engage on particular topics because they have their own interests and priorities and skill sets. And so that's, I think, a really important part of the process, is making sure you're aligning your interests and values with the skill set of the team that hopefully will be doing the vast majority of the work for you once you have it selected.
Yeah, yes. I've been in a lot of these different conversations. I talked to somebody who was like, I can only work with a design and build firm because I feel like I want the same people building who are designing. I know myself, I've got an independent architect as well as an independent general contractor who luckily lives 4 doors down from me, and I'll be watching him build my house while he builds his house. And I think that there's all these different ways that we can go. One of the things that's starting to get really popular here in our community are some different, almost like the Sears catalog idea, that they're trying to work with the government to get some homes that are pre-approved. And then at that point, you would just kind of pick which one you want and then just hire a builder. For people who are looking to go that route, because it will obviously reduce costs, what should they be looking at with some of the pre-approved designs, and in terms of either fire resilience or just what to know about making sure that they rebuild the right way, even with something that they're built, let's say that they build back better, even though they're going through what is essentially a model, or my world of digital marketing, we'd call a template.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the first thing I'll say is that some of those pre-approved designs are really cool and really compelling in all kinds of ways. And I've seen really innovative things. I haven't spent a lot of time with the options that you all are facing, but I've seen some of the ones that people at the community in Lahaina were kind of looking at, and also seen some of the ones that people in Boulder were looking at. And I think they do provide opportunity potentially to get things done faster and quicker, even on the permitting side, because if they're pre-approved, that can really help you expedite the government process part of your rebuild time as well as the construction time. I think the thing that I would just say is that even though there's a slate of designs, they're not all the same, right? They all fit some basic constraints. So they are, at least the ones that some of the builders offered here, they're bigger and smaller ones. They're, or ones that were more, I'm not sure what the current regulations are for you all on electrification of home appliances and stuff, but we had some that were fully electrified appliances versus some that were a mix of gas and electric, or were customizable at some level. So they almost all have some degree of customization. And so looking at whether it can be customized in the way that you care about. So for example, if you really care about paint colors, that would be an important thing. Some of them there's a company here that had a lot of home automation as part of their template packages. And that was pretty neat and very compelling to some homeowners to think about how they could really be having a lot of new home technology in their rebuild as part of the package, and not have to think about, do I want windows that raise and lower or whatever, is just part of it or not. And so I think even if you want to go that kind of template route, thinking really carefully about what are the 3 or 4 things that I'm going to be super disappointed if I don't have when I'm done, and making sure that template can accomplish that. Because I think there probably is a template that can give most people their 3 or 4 things, but you might have to look at several to figure that out.
Yeah, and I think that even with the models, like you're still able to pick materials, right?
Mm,
So if you
yeah.
do want to be more fire resistant, you can have those conversations. But I think it's important to have those conversations. I know I spent a short amount of time in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and I think it was Brad Pitt's Make It Right Foundation was building as many fast prefab homes as they could, and again, great intentions, but within 10 years, most of those houses had to be completely rebuilt. And so I think that, as we're looking at the idea of build back better, we all that feeling, and I am at the front of this line of wanting to build back faster. But building back better really does mean looking at how we can take, even if we're working within a pre-approved model, how we make sure that we're building this with the best construction possible, as best just being really smart about sustainability as well as energy efficiency. And it does seem like there's room for um, uh, nuance and customization depending on who you get to build the home. So,
Yeah. And maybe I could add something too, just about the
mhm,
speed thing, like, so we have seen that builders that kind of were less custom have been a bit faster in getting their builds done here in Colorado. Um, so they, but and so I think that can be a real plus. But I wanted to comment just generally on speed is that I think a lot of people going through this process, understandably, are channeling their grief and trauma and financial stress or whatever towards getting it done faster, and that's really understandable, and certainly where that's where I would be if I were in your shoes.
mhm.
We did see a lot of people who said, wow, actually when I slowed down just a little bit, I felt better about it because I slowed down enough to then ask the builder about what the options were for roofing, and was one of them more fire resilient. And I and then and that actually saved me money in the long term, because then I realized I could do this thing without a copy, like. And so we did hear from people that, like, they did find value in reminding themselves to kind of to take a step back and realize it's a long game, right? It's like,
Mhm.
no matter what you do, this process is going to take months and months, unfortunately. And so just reminding yourself that you can take the time to ask follow-up questions, talk to your neighbors about what they're doing, and see if they got a better deal on something than you did. And that we heard from a lot of people that helped them in the long run actually save time and money, to be a little bit, to be as deliberate as they could, kind of in the first 6 months, let's say.
That's a great point because we're all still learning everything and we're getting a lot of information, some misinformation, I'm sure, some biased information depending on who we're talking to across our architect, builders. I mean, even if it's just personal preferences, I've noticed a little bit of bias with some of these conversations. And I think for us, if I mean, I don't know if I can speak for the whole community, but personally, my big fear is more the permit process. So like the idea of speed is the speed to get to the permitting. I feel like if I
Mm-hmm.
can get an approved permit, I'm totally okay slowing down, working with my contractor and making sure that all of those things are right because
Mm.
those are the things that we can control, right? And so anything we can't control, we get excited about because okay, we can take our time a little bit because we know this is what we're going to get. So I think that it has a little bit just of context for where we are as a community. But I want to kind of dive into some of these other communities because I know you've seen how these communities and governments affected by wildfires have brought in new ideas for building back better, maybe sometimes faster, but we'll stick with building back better. What are some of the best ideas you've seen in the rebuilding efforts?
Yeah, so I think one thing is just on process. So we've seen some communities try to really expedite the permitting process for people who are rebuilding. And I think, there's a huge cost and burden to people rebuilding from those administrative and bureaucratic processes. And I'm someone who as talking about bias, my personal bias is that building departments and permitting process is an important part of safe and resilient communities. But that said, that doesn't mean that any process can be improved. And so I hope that all local governments who experience these kinds of devastating events are really thinking carefully about their process and what they can do to expedite things, so that is not it might still take time, but it's not the burden of stress and people feel like, oh, if I go through this and I follow the rules, I will get out the end in a reasonable amount of time and it'll be approved. We've seen some communities think about their permit, the costs of permits are also not non-zero, as you all are learning, I'm sure. And so, some communities have tried to reduce the cost burden of that process as well. So that's kind of on the government side. On the community side, I think some communities really take the opportunity to reflect on the community held norms and values. For example, like, fire height, would you all as a community like some things like a few more fire hydrants? Or what is your, land abutting your community in terms of vegetation? Like, is there an opportunity there to think about restoration of that as a community, which can also really help your community fire resilience and also, contribute to contribute to a more resilient community. One of the things that happened here is that some of our communities actually had requirements for wood fencing because of the aesthetic preference, I would say. And so it took some communities getting together and being like, wait a second, like, it's not necessarily that we want to prohibit it, although some did prohibit wood fencing, although some did, but at least we want the option of not having to put in wood fencing. And so some communities thought really hard about some of those details, which I don't know, again, like, I try not to think about the details of things like fencing regulation in my community, but the slate is more or less clean now. And if we don't have the right things and now we're thinking hard about them, we should advocate for in my opinion, for the change at the level that it makes sense, whether it's at the, block level, a homeowners associate, what community organization, whatever level that is.
Yeah. And it's funny. I always say change equals opportunity. And one of the things that we're just going up against, and we talked about it in the first episode here about us being an unincorporated community. And so we don't really have HOAs. We've got one woman who's in charge of our community as a county supervisor who also oversees over 100 miles of communities as well. So like, it's those are the things I think that in our unique situation, it's like, gosh, that sounds really good. But getting that implemented is like, we can't even get power lines buried. So that's an uphill battle that it's good to hear about the impact that these have in other communities. And maybe that could be inspiring for us years from now. But I want to talk a little bit about kind of resiliency and sustainability, because I think they kind of go hand in hand. So how do you see features like solar power and energy efficient design and green building certifications like contributing to just a safer rebuilding process in general?
Yeah, and so I also see resilience and sustainability as kind of being pretty closely tied. I think we all want, the best possible chance of a safe house. We would love to avoid future, not only the house being destroyed, but the trauma around those experiences, which are devastating in and of itself. And I think so, as far as kind of the sustainability side of things, I think, one way that's tied, right, is that energy efficiency, your choice of major appliances and things like that does have impacts on your, contribution to climate change, which we know is an important driver of these increasingly devastating wildfire events. Um, Also, I think both resilience and sustainability are really hard because, like, you're going to rebuild your house, and tomorrow there's not going to be like the day after, there's not going to be a wildfire. So you're being forced or asked, when you're thinking about resilience and sustainability, you're thinking in the future. It's some indeterminate
Hmm.
point, and you don't know what, and you're making decisions now, right? And it's those kinds of like offset decisions with it, it costs something now, whether it's time or money or information or something, right? It costs something now for some benefit in the future. So I think both of those decisions are helped by thinking about, well, what am I going to get out of this? So like energy efficiency, for example, you can actually, or solar, you do save quite a bit on power in the long term. But so thinking about that, and is that payoff worth it to you in terms of how you size or think about those systems, and likewise, like resilience, you know um thinking about, I mean, I like to think of both of those things as a continuum. Like, I'm not a
Hmm.
all or nothing person in most cases. And so it's like, maybe you decide you can do the eaves and the vent coverings because those aren't that expensive,
Hmm.
but that you're not going to put in a super fancy extra fire resistant roof just because that, like, but you're still like moving yourself along that path, right? So you're moving the needle. And so I would encourage people on both sustainability and resilience to think about them together, and also think about them like as like there's this continuum, and can you move the needle, and like you don't need to be over here with this like perfect, the thing that everybody says is the most resilient house you could possibly build. Like, you don't have to be there to have not, like, you can still move the needle towards that direction and help your own outcomes in the future as well as help your communities.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you said about the vent and the eaves, because I wanted to talk about budget, because going back to the different types of contractors and whatnot, everyone's getting thrown all sorts of different numbers. A lot of the most basic ways that people are being told to budget this is based off of square footage, and then I mean, I've heard the range from 250 a square foot to 800 a square foot, and
Mhm.
that, you know, wow, little different. But
Yeah.
so I really appreciated the idea. We'll call it a sustainability hack to be able to use, to be able to work on the vents and the eaves. What are other budget friendly ways to make your house a little bit more resilient when rebuilding?
Yeah, I mean, I would just ask the question about, yeah, so ask the question about windows. I mean, windows in general are not particularly cheap, but what is the differential between something that's more, like, I think that's, hopefully if you have a builder who's knowledgeable about these things, they can help you with that. Is like, okay, so windows can be really important. So like what is it, what is the cost differential there, right? Between kind
Mhm.
of the standard window, the window I want because it looks really nice, and then um and then the fire resilient window. And I think in some of those cases, you're going to find the differential is not that much. And in other
Mhm.
cases, you're going to find it's really significant. We also found that for builders who were less experienced with a particular topic, they tended to estimate a bigger cost differential. So, like, if your builder knows where to source more fire resistant windows, then they're likely to tell you, it's not going to be that much more. But if you're working with a builder who hasn't done that before, then they may give you an off the cuff answer. It's like, oh, it's going to be 30% more. And I don't know in this particular case how much it costs. But so again, it's a place of like, if making sure you're asking those questions, um, and that they're helping you arrive at a solution and find a cost effective solution.
All right. We find ourselves back at builder bias, which I like. I think I feel like I felt it not in a negative way, but definitely in ways where my GCs like certain things more than other. My architect likes certain things more than others. what is the best way to get because you're going to get an honest answer from your builder based off their experience, but how can we do additional research to, what questions should we be asking? Do we ask that just to the builder that we're interviewing? Or maybe help us understand, like, how do we help these builders pass their bias to be able to ask the questions that gives us the answers that we're looking for? And I know that's kind of broad, but maybe help lead us down the path of what we should be asking.
Yeah, and I think, to be clear, I think the bias is totally understandable, right? It's like we all
Hmm.
come at it with our own priorities and values and expectations. And so, builders, a lot of builders have a lot of experience, right?
Yeah.
And what they have experience with is for sure and should color what they recommend to you, right? Like we would hope it would. And so, yeah, my recommendation there would be really just to think, um, as far as like the type of builder, thinking about how much capacity you have for decision making um, and just time, right? So if you go with more of a template route, it's a little bit more streamlined in terms of your own personal investment of time as well as kind of the broader process. But then when you're getting down to the selection of a specific builder, I would just recommend talking to them about the things that you value.
Mm.
And if those things resonate with them, they'll have good ideas around the things around helping you with the things that you value. And if your values are not resonating, I mean, values are totally personal, right? They don't need to resonate.
Hmm.
Then you'll find that they're saying, well, I've never done that before. I'd have to go and talk to this other person. And so I think that there's some um, kind of high level questions that can help you, that you can tell from the depth of the answer that you get, they can help you see whether that's something that organization also values. I was going to say one other topic on builders is that, in the kind of context that you all are working in, which is super complicated, and there are also builders who really specialize in a post disaster context.
Hmm.
Um, and some, and it obviously depends on the company, right? But some of those here really helped um, homeowners out. So, for example, there were some that really helped homeowners navigate the insurance process
Hmm.
rather than having to do that separately. So, the builder specifically helped the homeowner navigate the insurance process. That's part of the package they offer. So, for example, if that's something that some of your listeners are like, wow, if I could find
Hmm.
someone who would help me with the building and help me navigate the insurance, that would really, like, so they might choose to look at some of these companies and ask hard questions about like that part of the process and what they could help with. So just to say there's a real wide range of services, right? You talked about designers
Hmm.
and builders, but in this particular context, I know there's some companies who have an even broader range than a traditional builder. And so I would encourage people to think about, is that what you want? Because it may be.
No, that's a great point. When we're Googling and doing our chat GPT prompts, like really looking and seeing, hey, like which construction companies are specialized in post disaster builds? Because there's, this is, the this episode is called Rebuilding 101, not Building 101. It is very specific. We are in a just a situation that none of us thought we were going to be in, and we're not in a place where there's a bunch of new construction. So there's this navigation that you're alluding to that is hard across all parts of this. And if you could get your builder and your insurance company, you know, it aligned in some way, shape, or form, I think that's that. God, I can only imagine how helpful that would be. So
Mm-hmm.
for
Yeah, so
anyone
we had some people who were really excited about that and found it was super beneficial.
Interesting. Okay. I dig it. So you're doing all this research in different rebuilding scenarios, earthquakes, hurricanes, wildfires. Specifically with wildfires, what are some things that have just really opened your eyes in your research that maybe you were like, wow, I did not think going into this, that's what I was going to learn?
No, that's a hard question. Um, yeah. Um, I guess one thing that we found interesting, so one of the things we've done here is we did a survey, or we were involved in a survey of what people's priorities were in their rebuilding process.
Hmm.
Um, and we asked about several different things. And, a high priority, the highest priority across our, data survey respondents was cost. Um, but there are also really high priorities around other things, um, resilience and sustainability being two of them. And one thing that really surprised me is that those priorities were not expressed as conflicting with each other. So,
Hmm.
I think we have this thought that like these things are going to cost more, and maybe they do, right? But
Hmm.
also, I think like people, you can think creatively about how to achieve them, find the right team, all these things we've talked about. Like, I would urge people not to think about it like it doesn't have to necessarily cost more. Like it may in the end, depending on what you want and how you're doing, but it's not the
Hmm.
given that all these things are necessary. Like, and there's all kinds of other things that also cost more. Like, I want granite countertops, for example, right? And like that costs more than other kinds of like that's just
Yeah.
cost matters. So that was one thing I thought was really interesting, is that people were able to really hold these priorities in together with, and not focus so much on like how they're conflicting with each other, but focus more on how they could use those together to get to the house they wanted at the end.
Mhm.
um Another thing I was going to say is just that like I think all the work you're doing, and the community engagement is so valuable, and is valuable at all stages in the process, um, in the sense that the collective trauma and grief is something, and I know you talked about like that's something that is, people have told us that like I really needed to be in a place where I was with people who had the same experiences.
Mhm.
um the rebuilding, like thinking about like if I'm able to help my neighbor, if we source the same flooring, could we save money, could it get there faster or something, so granular decisions. People also saw community engagement
Mhm.
as being helpful. um and so we heard a lot about people like really leaning into their sense of community, or even building new community around this experience. And so I guess I would, and we all have different preferences for how we want to engage with their neighbors in the outside world, and we're introverted or not. But I think leaning into those opportunities to engage with others can be really helpful, both for a process and getting the outcome that you want, but also for helping it feel better, making sure you are getting the information from a broad range of sources across biases. We've seen that to be
Mhm.
really valuable, and communities have found that to be really valuable. So I just encourage people to lean into those opportunities. um,
Yeah. And I think just what I'm hearing through a lot of this is like the best way to get the right builder is to kind of just have an alignment in terms of priorities, process, and values. Like when you were talking about, you know, looking at priorities and people coming to find that they're maybe not as competing as they think. I want it to be sustainable and I want it to be affordable, and those two things can exist at the same time. I feel like, one of the things my strategy, and I don't know if it's right, is I want to design Camelot. I want my builder to tell me how much Camelot costs, and then want to ask him how I can get it, what I need to take away to get it within my budget. And I feel like if we can do that, then you're looking at all those wants and needs and priorities shift when you have to make budget cuts, right? Um, and and so at the other time, I know people who don't want to think about that at all. they do want that. Even if it's big, they want that number of this is how much it costs per square foot, and just do it. I don't, so it does seem to me that like when you're looking at a builder and you're interviewing them, sometimes especially in a community that wasn't expecting to rebuild, I feel like there's a fear of like supply and demand. I've seen enough contractors who are around now. I feel like there's enough. But it seems to me like the questions should continually serve that alignment of priority, values, and just process. Because if somebody's not going to work with you and you want to go do something really custom, and they're like, this is how we build it, okay? Like these are the 7 options. Like pick one. Like that's not, that might not be for you. But if you're somebody who's like, I couldn't do 400 options, I love having these 7, that's great too. So you just it seems very, just as like they're going to build a custom home, you're kind of going through a custom experience, and you got to find the right person for you.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a long-term relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Months, and it really, it like you said, it affects many things. Like, we talked to a lot of people who are feeling a lot of decision fatigue.
Yeah.
Around, because you start with like which builder, but then you get to like what cover are you going to put on your light switch. I mean, like it just spans the whole range of like things. And so some people really benefited from and needed that like fewer options bucket, because that really helped them move forward. Some people, were really wanting that to dream big in whatever capacity they wanted, and wanting to work with someone who would help them understand how they could make that happen. I know my husband and I occasionally look at fixer-uppers, and we decide that we can't have a fixer-upper because then we would have a divorce, because we are not good at those decisions. We don't work well in that, like in a building context. And so for us, like we would likely choose something with a smaller range of options, because we just like, we know we're not good at that. And it causes us a lot. Each decision is a lot of stress. But for other people, each decision might be a lot of opportunity, right? So it's like, it's some kind of who you are and what you want out of the process as well.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about maximizing time, because we are in this space right now where no permits have been approved. I think it just is a little bit tied to the speed of the cleanup and maybe wanting more lots cleared. That's nothing that we can figure out together here today. But what I feel like I just keep learning, and I'm so grateful that I've got a GC who's also a friend and will answer all my crazy texts that range from like, tell me about this type of flooring, to what if we just circumvent the permit process and start building? What would be the penalty for that? What information should we be gathering right now? What pace should we be going? I mean, I assume we should probably be going at whatever pace we're comfortable with, but there's probably some advantages to moving at a certain speed. How should we use our time as we're trying to figure out how to rebuild a home?
I don't know if I have a good answer. I don't know if I have a good answer to that one. Yeah, I guess the only thing I would just say is that, to be as deliberate as you need to be. Like, you're not late to a party if you don't have a permit, right? Like, I mean,
yeah.
Or if you haven't submitted for a permit, right? Like, in some of these other, I forget when the first permit was approved in Colorado, but I think it was like 5 or 6 months after the event. And in Maui, I think it was longer, but maybe more like 8 or 9 months, but I'm not sure. I can't recall the exact number. But so just to say that, like, one thing I would say is to try to silence that voice that you're not doing it fast enough. Like, it takes time, right? Understanding what your insurance will and will not cover, that's a whole thing, right? Understanding like what, like all of those kind of preparatory decisions, understanding how your mortgage company is going to work with your insurer, right? That's a whole nother thing, right? And for many people, they need to sort that out before they can get to the next stage. And so My only advice on time management is to give yourself some grace.
Okay. All
And,
right.
and in whatever way you're doing it, it's okay.
All right. Last question. So as a community that's so new to building, what am I not asking that we should be asking? What questions should we be asking, and what answers do you have for us?
What questions should you be asking? Yeah, I guess I would urge people to question their assumptions, whatever your assumptions
Mm,
are. And we've talked about how the people you're getting information from, including me and Austin, have biases, right? But
yep.
also the people, those of you who are rebuilding also have biases. So you may think that a particular technology doesn't work because you talked to somebody who put it in 20 years ago and they were unhappy with it, right?
Mm,
So okay, it might still be true, but like make sure to ask we're coming at this process with all these things, all this baggage, good and bad, right? And so I would urge you, like, if you think something's really expensive, maybe it is, maybe it's not. If you think something's really fire resilient, again, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So just try to like evaluate your own biases and assumptions as well. And I think that's one place where talking to people can also help. Um, and um, and try to use that as a conversation starter, both with people you're working with and with community, to see if you can use this opportunity also to really get what you want by making sure that you're coming at it with a full picture of what your options are.
awesome. Abbie, thank you so much for being here. This information is absolutely amazing. And I appreciate your insight and all the work that you're doing to help all communities affected by wildfires and other natural disasters.
Thanks, Austin. I really appreciate it.